Hello, welcome back to Faith and Freedom. I'm Gerrit, and I'm here to help square a libertarian political philosophy with a Christian theology. And today I would like to talk about labor or unions. Now, there's a variety of opinions on unions amongst libertarians, but most will agree that we have to balance the right of workers to collectively organize and bargain, or in other words, to unionize, with the freedom of contract, which drives a free market. It's a hugely important part of driving a free market. And by freedom of contract, I mean individuals being able to arrange contracts with one another. And that is in relation to an employer-employee relationship, in which that I agree to do a certain type of work and or a certain amount of work for a certain amount of compensation. And this contract should be sacred above all else, above all union agreements, legislation, regulation, and that's where we've gotten into a problem in terms of the regulation and legislation has been heavy in terms of favoring the unions and not so much favoring the freedom of contract that we want to drive our markets. So basically, in terms of unions, it's a good concept. Workers should be allowed to get together and say, hey, we're going to tell the boss that if you want to pay us all for the same work, you should pay us evenly, and that should be a right of workers to do. But it should also, on the other side, be a right of the employer to say, no, I can't afford that, so I can't give any of you guys that, and I'm going to look somewhere else for people who will do the same job for less. So that's a good balance, but that's very far from what we have now, and that's because through the years, labor has hitched itself to basically the Democratic Party, progressive independents, and mainly the left. And what they've done is they've created a situation where the regulations and the legislations favor workers' rights over the freedom of contract. So basically, the workers have more bargaining power, and the employers have less freedom to basically get rid of them and hire other workers if they've already had the union be established in their industry, or it depends on what industry. Some industries like the auto industry are fully unionized, and that comes down from federal regulations. So that's where I think we have some trouble, and it certainly puts some conservative-minded union workers in a big pickle, because their union leadership and their personal interests are driving them to support Democratic candidates and progressive candidates where, if they have conservative values where they say value lower taxes, are pro-life, and for the sanctity of marriage, they end up compromising their principles in their votes, basically to satisfy the needs on their employment side, especially when it comes to their union. So that's a tough spot, and I know a few individuals that are in that spot. They don't want to buck their union brothers, but they really have gotten to the point where they can't plug their nose and vote for the Democrats that are supporting the unions. Where unions are especially damaging, and I think most libertarians would be 100% across the board in agreement on this, is in the public sector. So we're talking about teachers, police, and government workers. So the reason for this is that they can corner the labor market in these industries. And what's so bad about that is because the entire payment of these folks is all from public money. So it's all tax money that goes to pay these wages and these benefits. And then it steamrolls from there to where any government building, say they need to put a new addition on the county building up in Mayville. Often these governments are obligated to hire union workers to do that work. So that cuts out a lot of competition from non-union workers that could possibly do that job for a lower price. And since it's an upgrade to a public building, that falls on the backs of public funding, of the taxpayers again. So you can see how this just snowballs and snowballs. And we talked about education in the last episode, and unions have really gotten our public education system into a pickle because they are a huge voting bloc. Unionized teachers are a huge voting bloc at the state level, and they get to call the shots. And a lot of times when it comes to education policies, the ideal libertarian solution and the ideal, I would think, liberty solution to education is to have the decisions being made at the school being made as local as possible. So that means parents through the school board should be calling the shots in terms of how our children get educated. That is not the case. The teachers unions consistently steamroll the school boards and the local parents, and we can see that in action in our cities in the U.S. right now. The parents and the local administrators and the officials in the cities want their children back in school. And I think the science at this point is pretty clear that schools are not places where this virus spreads quickly. And school-age kids are not the ones who typically carry this virus, are not the ones dying from this virus, are not the ones spreading this virus. We talk about, following the science, yet when it comes to that, we're seeing huge pushback among the teachers unions to get back in the school and teach their kids. They don't feel safe. They think, we don't have the proper, stuff we need to go back in school. And sure, maybe they have a leg to stand on this argument, but what a non-union school system could offer in terms of solution to this is like, all right, union teacher or older teacher, you don't feel comfortable coming back to school in this situation. We understand that. We're willing to offer you a severance package, or here's retirement. Let's get a young new teacher who isn't as concerned about this virus in here and start teaching these kids again. Right now, that's not an option because the teachers unions have too much power. They're not going to let that happen. They're not going to let their older teachers get pushed out for younger teachers who'd be willing to teach. And that, again, falls on us as school taxpayers because we're still paying regardless of if our kids are getting educated in those schools or if they're getting some hodgepodge online remote education. We're still paying the same price. So let's contrast that to another industry during this pandemic. Let's contrast that to the hospitality industry and the food and beverage manufacturing, largely non-union, right? We have been carrying a big portion of this economy, and we've been able to do it because I feel like we're non-union. So that gives the business owners more flexibility of how to stay in business, keep the products flowing, keep the money coming in the middle of a COVID, if you want to call it a pandemic or a virus situation. We're able to take the proper precautions, adapt as the conditions with the virus change, and just keep the economy moving. And that should be able to be done in all sections of our economy. And I feel like labor unions are getting in the way of progress when it comes to this. So like I said, same idea with the government service union. Locally, we have a unique situation at the county where the workers at the county are unionized, but the managers are not. And this is playing itself out right now in the county legislature to where the managers are complaining because their raise that was in the executive's budget got cut out by the legislator, which is a good move because I don't feel like county managers should be getting a raise in the middle of a pandemic when people are losing their jobs, period. But it's now a situation of the county managers who are not unionized have to keep up with all the nice compensation and the benefits that the union employees get. So you get a situation of keeping up with the Joneses, and the county legislator has to bow to all of it because the public workers, the CSEA union, is so powerful, and the county managers have a lot of pull. At any point, they could walk out, they could strike, and the whole bargaining agreement with the county legislator and the county workers is, like I said, really one-sided when it comes to the law and to policies in favor of the unions and not in favor of the taxpayers saving their hard-earned money. So let's get into some of what Scripture might speak on, and Scripture does not speak directly to unions, and I don't want to stretch scripture too thin or use it wrongly in this case. I'm going to cite some of the parables, and I know most of these parables deal not with earthly wealth and earthly wages, but more with spiritual wages. But I think there's some good examples in here that we can carefully apply to this. So we see the parable of the talents, right? So a master gives his servant different amounts of money. I believe it's 5, 3, and 1 talent each. And he says, do good with this, and basically lets them invest. And the ones that had 5 and 3 invest, and they basically double their money. So when the master comes back, he's happy because they've invested it. And then you have the one servant who only got 1 talent, and he did not invest it. He buried it. He saved it. He didn't do anything with it. And the master's pretty hard on him and says, you lazy, foolish servant, and cast him away. Now, if those servants were unionized, I think probably the union rep would be stepping in there and going to the master, hey, we got to have a trial here and disciplinary action. You can't just cast this guy out. But that's not what happens. He gets cast out. End of story. The parable of the virgins. So we have 5 wise virgins and 5 unwise virgins that didn't bring enough oil. So the unwise ones have to leave the site of the wedding festival. Meanwhile, while they're gone, the bridegroom comes and lets the wise virgins that took extra oil with them into the wedding festival. I think if that were a union situation, if those virgins were unionized, they probably would have picketed outside until their 5 sisters got back so they could all go in together, because that's the spirit of collective bargaining. Like I said, I might be stretching those a little thin and applying them to this. And the last one I'm going to use is I think it illustrates the freedom of contract concept really well when we look at the parable of the workers in Matthew chapter 20. So how it works out is the owner of a vineyard goes out early in the morning to hire workers for a full day's work, and he offers the first few that he finds early in the morning 1 denarius which is worth a whole day's work. So he offers them, and then he realizes that he doesn't have quite enough workers, or he notices that there's still people standing around the marketplace looking for work. So throughout the day, he's offering all these people jobs in the vineyard to go. When it comes time to pay them, he decides to pay them all equally. Well, the guys that only worked 1 hour, they're really excited about that, where the ones that worked all day long for the same amount of money, they're grumbling. I mean, they're kind of sounding like union workers a little bit, but that's not how it goes. There isn't any picketing, there isn't any collective bargaining in this situation. The owner of the vineyard stands his ground, and he says, "Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So freedom of contract right there. I hope this got you thinking. I hope if you're looking at candidates or looking to run for office yourself, you'll consider a policy in terms of labor that will get that balance back to the freedom of contract that we need, and get some of the legislative and regulatory advantages out of the hands of the unions. And most of all, I think we need to get unions out of our public sphere. Like I said, they corner the market, they drive up costs of the taxpayers, and I just think that if unions have a place, it's in the private sector. So please consider that, and thank you again for watching Faith and Freedom. We'll see you next time.